I showed up to my wife's office with a flower bouquet and a flight ticket to Paris for Valentine, only to see my wife's co-workers congratulating her on her engagement with the CEO. Then my wife kissed him and flashed the diamond ring, while everyone cheered. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, trip, and pulled out my 83% company share, $557 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 356 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. So here's the thing about Valentine's Day. It's basically a corporate conspiracy designed to make guys like me panic buy overpriced flowers and pretend we're romantic geniuses. But after 7 years of marriage to Sophia Monroe, I figured I'd actually earned the right to do something genuinely thoughtful. Hence why I'm standing in the marble and glass cathedral that is Leorateca's lobby at 9 a.m. sharp, clutching a bouquet of red roses that cost more than most people's car payments and 2 first-class tickets to Paris that I'd been planning for months. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Adrian, you romantic genius, surprising your wife at work like some kind of rom-com hero. Trust me, that's exactly what I was thinking too. 7 years of marriage, and I wanted to recapture that spark from the early days when she'd look at me like I hung the moon instead of like I forgot to take out the trash again. The Leoratec lobby is one of those aggressively modern spaces that screams, "We have money, and we want you to know it." Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek reception desk that probably costs more than a house, and enough chrome to blind a small aircraft. The kind of place where you feel underdressed even when you're wearing a $1,000 suit. Which, for the record, I absolutely was. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head about 50 times. Walk in, find Sophia, present flowers with a flourish, reveal the Paris tickets like some kind of magician pulling rabbits out of hats. Maybe she'd tear up a little. Maybe she'd kiss me right there in front of everyone. Maybe we'd have one of those moments that reminds you why you fell in love in the first place. But here's the thing about life. It's got a twisted sense of humor that makes Murphy's Law look optimistic. The first clue something was off? The noise. Instead of the usual corporate hum of keyboards clicking and coffee machines gurgling, I heard clapping. Like, enthusiastic clapping. The kind you hear at graduation ceremonies or when someone announces they're pregnant. The second clue. The phones. Every single person in that lobby had their phone out, cameras flashing like I'd walked into a paparazzi convention. Which, let me tell you, is not exactly the intimate romantic moment I was going for. And then I saw it. Or rather, I saw them. Right there in the center of the atrium, surrounded by what looked like half the company's workforce, was my wife. Sophia Monroe, in all her perfectly coiffed, designer-dressed glory. And she wasn't alone. Damien Locke, CEO of our biggest competitor, tall enough to play basketball and groomed like he stepped out of a men's magazine, was down on one knee, in front of my wife, sliding what looked suspiciously like a diamond ring onto her finger. For a second, I thought maybe I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe I'd finally snapped from too many 18-hour work days, and my brain was playing tricks on me. But then Sophia leaned down and kissed him. Not a quick peck, not an awkward business relationship thing. A full-on, passionate, "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life" kiss. The crowd erupted. "Congratulations," they chanted, like they were at a sporting event and their team had just scored the winning touchdown. Phones kept flashing. Someone might have actually thrown confetti, though that could have been the stress-induced hallucination thing again. I stood there like a statue, still holding my romantic gesture supplies, watching my marriage implode in real time while surrounded by what felt like the world's most enthusiastic audience. The roses in my hand suddenly felt ridiculous. Like showing up to a gunfight with a water balloon. The Paris tickets might as well have been Monopoly money. 7 years of marriage, and apparently I'd missed the memo about the divorce. Here's what's really messed up. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the flowers dramatically and storm out like some scorned lover in a soap opera. I didn't even clear my throat loudly or make one of those passive-aggressive comments that would have at least acknowledged my existence. I just stood there, processing the fact that my wife was currently making out with another man while wearing his engagement ring. And somehow the most surreal part was that everyone else seemed totally fine with this situation. Like they'd all gotten an invitation to this little celebration, and somehow mine had gotten lost in the mail. Chloe Tan, the receptionist, caught my eye from behind her desk. Poor kid looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She gave me this bewildered look that clearly said, "Sir, I have no idea what's happening here, but I'm pretty sure it's not good. I nodded at her, because apparently my brain had decided that polite acknowledgement was the appropriate response to watching your marriage end in front of a live studio audience, and turned around. The New York wind hit me like a slap in the face as I walked back onto the street. February in the city is brutal on a good day, but when you're carrying dead roses and useless plane tickets, it feels downright vindictive. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, watching people hurry past in their winter coats, everyone wrapped up in their own little worlds, completely oblivious to the fact that mine had just gotten nuked from orbit. The funny thing about betrayal is how quiet it is in the moment. You'd expect violins or dramatic music or at least some kind of soundtrack to mark the occasion. Instead, you get car horns and the distant rumble of the subway and the sound of your own breathing, which suddenly seems way too loud. I look down at the roses in my hand. Still perfect, still red, still completely pointless. The Paris tickets were getting soggy from the humidity, probably ruined already. 7 years of marriage, and this is how it ends. Not with a fight or a conversation or even a text message. With a public engagement party that I apparently wasn't invited to. Welcome to my life, folks. Population: one very confused, very betrayed, and very pissed off husband who just learned that his wife has been auditioning for a replacement. So there I was, back in my penthouse like some kind of wounded animal returning to its cave. 34th floor of a building that cost more than most small countries' GDP, with a view of Manhattan that real estate agents describe as breathtaking, and I usually call Tuesday. But today it looked like a concrete graveyard, and I felt right at home. That I set those pathetic roses on the kitchen counter like I was laying flowers on a grave. Which, let's be honest, I basically was. The marriage was dead. I just hadn't gotten the death certificate yet. The Paris tickets sat next to them, soggy and useless, like a cruel joke the universe had decided to play on me. Here's the thing about being betrayed. Your brain goes through this weird process where it tries to make sense of something that fundamentally doesn't make sense. Like, how do you wake up married and go to bed? Whatever the hell I was now. Divorced? Separated? Publicly humiliated? There really should be a better word for guy whose wife just got engaged to someone else while he was holding Valentine's gifts. But then something clicked. Maybe it was the shock wearing off, or maybe it was the 3 fingers of Glendronach I'd just poured myself. 25-year-old single malt that costs more per ounce than most people make in an hour. Whatever it was, my brain shifted from wounded husband mode to pissed-off businessman mode. And that's when I remembered something very important. That I walked over to my office. Because yes, I have an office in my apartment. Because when you're worth what I'm worth, you can have whatever the hell you want. And stopped in front of my favorite piece of art. It's this gorgeous oil painting of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, commissioned from some artist in Soho who charges ridiculous amounts to paint things you can see for free if you just walk outside. But the painting isn't the point. The painting is what's hiding the safe that I punched in the code, Sophia's birthday, because I'm apparently a sentimental idiot, and pulled out a folder labeled Core Assets. Boring name for what might be the most important documents in my life, but I've always believed in understated file organization. Inside that folder were the papers that told the real story. The incorporation documents for Leoratech, dated 7 years ago. The patent filings for the core technology that makes everything work, filed under my name, Adrian Kwan. The funding receipts showing exactly who put up the initial capital. The ownership structure that everyone seems to have conveniently forgotten, 83%. That's how much of Leoratech I own. $557 million worth of company, and I own 83% of it. Sophia? She owns exactly 0%. She's an employee, a very well-paid, very public-facing employee, but an employee nonetheless. The face of the company, as the board likes to say. The one who goes to conferences and gives interviews and poses for magazine covers, while I do the actual work of keeping the lights on. Don't get me wrong. She's good at what she does. Brilliant, even. She can work a room like a politician, charm investors like a snake oil salesman, and make our boring-as-hell enterprise software sound like the most exciting thing since sliced bread. But at the end of the day, she's the actress, and I'm the director, producer, and guy who owns the theater. That I spread the documents across my desk like I was planning a military campaign. Which, come to think of it, I basically was. 7 years of letting my wife take credit for my work, 7 years of standing in the background while she got the applause, 7 years of being the technical guy while she was the visionary. Well, congratulations, Sophia. You just declared war on the guy who built the kingdom you're trying to rule. That I opened my laptop and logged into the Leoritech financial systems. Not the pretty dashboard that the board sees, not the simplified reports that get sent to investors. The real systems. The ones that actually control where the money goes. See, here's something most people don't understand about modern businesses. Everything runs on access codes and permissions and digital signatures. You can't just walk into a bank with a briefcase and demand cash like some kind of movie villain. Everything is ones and zeros, passwords and protocols. And guess who designed all those protocols? Your boy Adrian. That's who. I started with the corporate credit cards. Sophia's card, which she uses for everything from business lunches to personal shopping sprees. Frozen. Damien's company card, which somehow ended up linked to our expense system during some strategic partnership nonsense. Also frozen. Then I moved on to the operational accounts. The money we use for payroll, vendor payments, office expenses, basically everything that keeps Leoritech running on a day-to-day basis. I didn't freeze them, exactly. That would be nuclear. But I did implement what I like to call emergency financial protocols. Basically, any expense over $1,000 now requires my personal approval. Any transfer to external accounts needs my digital signature. Any attempt to access our reserve funds triggers a security review that goes straight to my phone. Is it petty? Maybe. Is it legal? Absolutely. Is it going to make Sophia's life very complicated very quickly? Oh, you bet your ass it is. My phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up faster than I could count. 20 missed calls became 40. 40 became 100. The notification sounds were so constant, it was like having a very angry cricket living in my pocket. That I picked up the phone and looked at the caller ID. Sophia. 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 Damien. Elena, Sophia's assistant. Janet Cross, our CFO. Some number I didn't recognize. Sophia again. I flipped the phone face down and took another sip of my scotch. Here's the thing about scorched earth tactics. Once you start, you have to commit. You can't blow up the bridge and then complain that you can't get across the river. And right now, I was feeling very committed to some bridge burning. That I pulled up our travel booking system and canceled the company's upcoming executive retreat to Aruba. The one Sophia had been planning for weeks. The one that was supposed to be a team-building exercise for senior management. Funny how team-building exercises always seem to happen in tropical locations with 5-star resorts. Gone. Cancelled. Refunded to the company account, which was now under my direct control. That I canceled the catering contract for next week's investor presentation. The one with the artisanal cheese boards and champagne fountains that costs more than most people's annual salary. Gone. The premium parking spaces that Sophia had somehow convinced accounting were business necessities. Reverted to standard employee parking. The corporate membership to that exclusive gym downtown where she does networking lunches. Suspended pending review. By the time I was done, I'd systematically dismantled every perk, every convenience, every little luxury that Sophia had built into her corporate lifestyle. And the beautiful part? It was all completely legal, completely within my rights as majority owner, and completely devastating to someone who'd gotten used to living like a queen. My phone was still buzzing like an angry hornet. The number of missed calls had to be in the hundreds by now. But I just sat there, surrounded by the paperwork that proved I owned this empire, sipping my scotch and watching the city lights twinkle below. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Morning came with the kind of silence that feels dangerous. You know that moment in horror movies right before the killer jumps out? That's what my penthouse felt like at 7 a.m. No buzzing phone. I'd finally turned the damn thing off around 3 a.m. when the missed call count hit something like 347. No traffic noise filtering up from 34 floors below. Just me, my coffee machine, and the lingering taste of last night's scotch. That I was halfway through my first cup of actually decent coffee. None of that green smoothie bullshit Sophia had tried to convert me to, when the intercom crackled to life. Mr. Kwan, Patrick Delgado, the concierge, sounded like he was walking on eggshells. Patrick's worked this building for 15 years, seen everything from messy divorces to federal investigations, and he's got this professional poker face that could make a casino dealer jealous. But today he sounded nervous. Yeah, Patrick, what's up? Sir, there's a young woman down here in the lobby. Says she works for your wife. I mean, Mrs. Monroe. Well, she looks pretty distressed, sir. Should I send her up? Elena Vargas. Had to be. Sophia's assistant, 26 years old, fresh out of NYU with a business degree and enough optimism to power a small city. Kid's been working for Sophia for 2 years, doing everything from scheduling meetings to picking up dry cleaning, and she genuinely believes she's learning from a visionary. Poor thing has no idea she's been working for a professional bullshit artist. Send her up, Patrick. Thanks. 5 minutes later, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Elena looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Her usually perfect makeup was streaked with mascara. Her blonde hair was doing this weird thing where it looked like she'd been running her hands through it all night, and she was clutching an overstuffed handbag like it contained the secrets of the universe. Mr. Kwan, she said, and her voice cracked like she was 13 years old. I'm so sorry to bother you, but something's wrong with the systems and I don't know what to do, and Ms. Monroe isn't answering her phone, and, Elena. I held up a hand. Breathe. Come in. She stumbled into my living room like a lost tourist, looking around at the minimalist furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows with the kind of awe that said she'd never been in a place that cost this much per square foot. Which, let's be honest, she probably hadn't. Coffee? I asked. Yes, please. Thank you. I haven't slept, and she collapsed onto my couch like her legs had given out. I poured her a mug and handed it over. She wrapped her hands around it like it was a life preserver. Okay, I said, settling into the chair across from her. What's going on? The floodgates opened. The payroll system is frozen, she said, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in all night. Nobody got paid this morning. Not just the executives, nobody. The cleaning crew, the security guards, the junior developers. Jenny from accounting called me crying because her babysitter bounced, and she can't afford another one if she doesn't get paid today. She took a shaky breath and kept going. And the investor summit. The one next week with the Goldman Sachs people? The venue called and said our deposit got reversed. Something about insufficient funds, which doesn't make sense because we had $12 million in the operational account last week. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Elena's eyes were getting wider and more panicked. And then Ms. Monroe's corporate card got declined. At Starbucks, Mr. Kwan. Starbucks. She was trying to buy coffee for her meeting with the venture capital firm from Boston, and her card got declined for a $6 latte. She called me screaming, but I don't understand what happened. I checked with the bank, and they said the account is under some kind of administrative hold. What about Damien's card? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Same thing. He tried to pay for lunch yesterday, some fancy place in Midtown, and his card got denied too. The restaurant manager had to come over and everything. It was so embarrassing. Damien called me personally, which never happens, and he was furious. He kept asking if there was some kind of system glitch. Elena set down her coffee mug and looked at me with those big, desperate eyes that people get when their world is falling apart and they can't figure out why. Mr. Kwan, is it a glitch? Because I've been up all night trying to figure out what went wrong, and I can't find anything. The systems look normal from my end, but nothing's working. It's like someone just turned everything off. I stood up and walked over to my desk, pulled out a cream-colored envelope with Elena's name written on it in my careful handwriting. I'd prepared it the night before, during my scotch-fueled strategic planning session. Elena, I said, handing her the envelope. I need you to give this to Sophia. Tell her she has 24 hours. She took the envelope with trembling hands. 24 hours for what? To resign as CEO, publicly acknowledge that I'm the founder and majority owner of Leoratech, and begin repaying the personal expenses she's charged to the company over the past 3 years. The amount comes to approximately $473,000. It's all itemized in the letter. Elena's face went white. Like vampire white. Mr. Kwan, I don't understand. Is this about yesterday? At the office. Smart kid. Smarter than I'd given her credit for. Elena, let me ask you something. Did you think it was normal? Your boss getting engaged to another man while her husband was standing in the lobby holding flowers. She looked down at her hands. I know, sir. I thought it was really weird. But Ms. Monroe said you two were separated, that you'd agreed to an amicable divorce. and that the engagement was just timing. Did she tell you that before or after I walked in? Elena's silence was answer enough. Here's the thing, Elena. Leoratech isn't our company. It's my company. I founded it. I built it. I own 83% of it. Sophia is an employee. A very well-paid employee, but an employee nonetheless. And as of yesterday, she became an employee who's breaching her fiduciary duty to the company and engaging in activities that directly harm shareholder interests. I sat back down and looked at this kid who was probably making 35 grand a year and living in a studio apartment in Queens, working 60-hour weeks for a boss who charges designer handbags to the company expense account. The system isn't glitched, Elena. The system is working exactly as I designed it to work. Every account freeze, every declined card, every suspended service. That's me protecting the company from further financial abuse. Elena stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Should I tell her it's not a glitch? Tell her the truth, I said. Tell her that her husband, ex-husband, whatever we're calling it now, isn't the pushover she thought he was. Tell her that actions have consequences, and that some bridges, once burned, don't get rebuilt. She stood up on unsteady legs, clutching the envelope in her oversized purse. What about payroll? What about the employees who didn't do anything wrong? Payroll will resume as soon as Sophia signs the resignation letter that's in that envelope. The employees will be fine. It's management that needs to worry. Elena nodded, but she looked like she was about to cry again. Mr. Kwan, I know this isn't my place, but are you okay? And that's when I realized something. This 26-year-old assistant, who probably couldn't afford health insurance, was the first person to ask me that question. Not Sophia, not the board members, not any of the people who were supposedly on my side. Just Elena, who was stuck in the middle of a war she didn't start. I'm fine, Elena. Better than fine, actually. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, Mr. Kwan, I always thought you were the real genius behind Leoratech. Ms. Monroe talks a good game, but you're the one who actually makes things work. Smart kid. Really smart kid. After she left, I poured myself another cup of coffee and watched the city wake up 34 floors below. Somewhere out there, Sophia was about to get a very unpleasant surprise that I couldn't wait. Here's something they don't tell you about declaring war on your wife. The waiting is the worst part. It's like sitting in a doctor's office, except instead of finding out if that weird mole is cancerous, you're waiting to see how spectacularly your marriage is going to explode. That I spent most of the day doing what I do best, working. Locked myself in my home office, reviewed patent applications, analyzed market reports, basically anything that required enough brain power to keep me from obsessing over whatever nuclear meltdown was happening at Leoratech headquarters. My phone stayed off. The landline stayed unplugged. For all intents and purposes, Adrian Kwan had vanished from the face of the earth. Around 6 p.m., I ordered Thai food from that place on Columbus that doesn't care if you're worth $500 million or living paycheck to paycheck. They just make really good pad Thai and leave you alone. I ate dinner watching the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of orange and gold, trying to pretend this was just another Tuesday instead of the day I nuked my life from orbit. But by 11 p.m., I was pacing. 34 floors up, with a view that real estate agents call commanding, and I felt like a caged animal. The city spread out below me like a circuit board, all lights and patterns and logic, but up here in my ivory tower, nothing made sense anymore. That's when the pounding started. Not a polite knock. Not a doorbell. Actual pounding, like someone was trying to break down my door with their bare fists. The kind of desperate hammering that says emergency or police raid or ex-wife having a complete mental breakdown. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. Classy. Through the peephole, I could see her. Sophia Monroe, though I guess technically she was still Sophia Kwan for another few hours, standing in my hallway looking like she'd been through a blender. Her usually perfect makeup was streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. Her hair, which normally looked like she'd just stepped out of a salon, was doing this wild thing where half of it had escaped whatever she'd used to hold it back. And she was still wearing that engagement ring, the diamond catching the hallway light like a tiny spotlight announcing her betrayal. But here's the thing that really got me. She looked small. Sophia's never been tall, but she's got this presence that makes her seem bigger than she actually is. Command presence, they call it in the military. The ability to walk into a room and have everyone automatically assume you're in charge. Tonight, she looked like a lost kid who'd wandered away from her parents at the mall. I opened the door. "Please, Adrian," she whispered, and her voice was this broken thing that didn't sound anything like the confident CEO who'd been giving TED Talks and gracing magazine covers. "Don't do this." I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting her in, not closing the door. Just watching this woman I'd been married to for 7 years fall apart in my hallway. "Don't do what exactly?" "You know what." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and I noticed her mascara had left black smudges on her sleeve. "The accounts, the cards, the payroll. Elena told me about the letter." "Oh, so you got my terms." "They're insane, Adrian. $473,000? For business expenses?" I almost laughed. "Business expenses? Sophia, you charged a weekend at the Four Seasons to the company because you said you needed to recharge your creative energy. You bought a $12,000 handbag and claimed it was a networking tool. You hired a personal trainer and called it executive wellness. Those were legitimate. The fuck they were." The profanity just slipped out, and Sophia actually flinched. I don't curse much, never saw the point, but sometimes a situation calls for precision language. "You've been treating Leoratech like your personal piggy bank for 3 years, and now you're pissed that someone finally noticed." She stepped closer, and I could smell her perfume, that expensive stuff that costs more per ounce than most people make in a day. It used to drive me crazy in a good way. Now it just made me tired. "This isn't about the money," she said. "This is about yesterday. About Damien." "Is it?" "I know how it looked, but you don't understand the situation. We were going to tell you. The engagement was it was supposed to be temporary. A business arrangement." Now I did laugh, and it came out harsh and bitter. "A business arrangement. Right. Is that what you call making out with another man in front of half our employees?" Her face crumpled. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Damien was supposed to propose quietly, and then we were going to use the engagement to leverage the merger talks with his company. It was strategic, Adrian. You know how these things work. Strategic. I repeated the word like it tasted bad. "You got engaged to another man as a business strategy. It wasn't real. The engagement wasn't real. It was a way to test you." And there it was. The line that made me want to put my fist through the wall. "Test me? Test me how exactly?" "To see if you'd fight for me." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been practicing them. "To see if you still cared enough to get angry, to make a scene, to do something. Anything. We've been drifting apart for months, Adrian. You work 18-hour days. You barely talk to me. You act like I'm just another employee instead of your wife. I thought if I made you jealous, if I made you think you were losing me, maybe you'd remember why you married me in the first place." I stared at her for a long moment, processing this information. My wife had gotten engaged to another man to test my devotion. My wife had humiliated me in front of our entire company because she wanted to see if I cared enough to fight back. "Well," I said finally, "congratulations. You tested me, and now you know exactly how much fight I have left." "Adrian, please. You know what the really fucked up part is, Sophia? If you just talked to me, if you just said, 'Hey, I feel like we're growing apart. Maybe we should work on our marriage,' I would have listened. I would have made changes. I would have fought for us." I pushed off from the doorframe and took a step back into my apartment. "But you didn't do that. You decided to play games. You decided to manipulate me, to humiliate me, to test me like I was some kind of lab rat. And then you want to stand here and tell me it wasn't real. The engagement wasn't real, but the feelings, stop." I held up a hand. "Just stop. You want to know what's real? This conversation is real. That ring on your finger is real. The fact that you're standing in my hallway at midnight crying about consequences is real." She looked down at the engagement ring like she'd forgotten it was there. "I could give it back. I could make a public statement, say it was all a misunderstanding. We could use this, Adrian. We could use the drama to generate publicity for the company. People love a good redemption story. Jesus Christ, Sophia. Even now, even standing here with your marriage falling apart, you're thinking about publicity angles. It's what I do. It's who I am." "No," I said. "It's who you've become. And it's not someone I want to be married to anymore." She started crying harder then, these ugly, choking sobs that probably would have broken my heart yesterday. "Today they just made me tired. I'll sign your letter," she whispered. "I'll resign. I'll pay back the money. I'll do whatever you want. Just, just don't end us like this. Not over a stupid mistake. I looked at this woman who'd shared my bed for 7 years, who knew how I liked my coffee and which side of the bed I preferred, and the fact that I talk in my sleep when I'm stressed. This woman who'd just admitted to orchestrating an elaborate psychological manipulation because she thought it would be more effective than having an honest conversation. It's already ended, Sophia. This is just the paperwork. I started to close the door, then stopped. Oh, and Sophia, next time you want to test someone's love, maybe don't do it in front of a crowd with cameras. Some things can't be undone, no matter how sorry you are afterward. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing in the hallway for a few more minutes before the sound of her heels clicking away toward the elevator. I poured myself another scotch and stood at the window, looking out at the city that never sleeps. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Here's something they don't teach you in business school. The best boardroom battles aren't won with PowerPoint presentations or market analysis. They're won by the guy who controls the money and has the biggest set of balls. And this morning, wearing a navy Tom Ford suit and the tie Sophia gave me for our 3rd anniversary, poetic irony at its finest, I was about to remind 12 very important people exactly who owns this circus. The Leoratech boardroom is one of those intimidating spaces designed to make people feel like they're conducting serious business. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls that overlook Manhattan, a conference table that probably cost more than most people's houses, and enough chrome and leather to outfit a luxury car dealership. The kind of room where billion-dollar deals get made and careers get destroyed, sometimes in the same conversation that I walked in at exactly 9 a.m., because punctuality is power, and surveyed my audience. 12 directors sat around that massive table like nervous disciples waiting for their messiah to show up. Janet Cross, our CFO, was clicking her pen in that rapid-fire pattern she does when she's stressed. Click, 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 pause. Click, 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 pause. Like a nervous metronome counting down to disaster. Marcus Webb, our lead investor from Goldman Sachs, was scrolling through his phone with the kind of focused intensity that said he was probably reading very unflattering articles about us. Dr. Patricia Huang, our head of R&D, looked like she hadn't slept in days. And sitting at the far end of the table, looking like she'd been dressed by a team of crisis management consultants, was my soon-to-be ex-wife. Sophia had pulled herself together since last night's hallway breakdown. Perfect makeup hiding the evidence of her midnight crying session, hair styled within an inch of its life, and a conservative black suit that screamed, responsible executive having a very bad week. She was clutching a manila envelope like it contained her last will and testament, which, come to think of it, it basically did. I took my seat at the head of the table. Because yes, I sit at the head of the table, because I own 83% of this company, and looked around the room with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. Good morning, I said, setting my own folder on the table. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know yesterday's events have raised some questions, and I thought it was time we cleared the air. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. Adrian, we need to discuss the operational issues. The payroll freeze, the suspended accounts, the canceled investor summit. Our portfolio companies don't typically. Before we get to that, I interrupted, I think we need to establish some basic facts about Leoratech's ownership structure and leadership hierarchy. There seems to be some confusion in the market. I opened my folder and pulled out the incorporation documents, spreading them across the table like I was dealing cards. Leoratech was founded 7 years ago by me, Adrian Kwan. I provided the initial capital, developed the core technology, and filed all the foundational patents. I currently own 83% of the company. Dr. Huang leaned forward. Adrian, we all know you're the majority shareholder, but do we? I turned to face the board. Because yesterday I watched TechCrunch publish an article calling Sophia the visionary behind Leoratech's revolutionary platform. Last month, Forbes profiled her as the CEO who's redefining enterprise software. And 3 weeks ago, she gave a keynote at the Digital Innovation Summit where she talked about her company and her vision for the future. The pen clicking stopped. Janet's face had gone pale. Now, I understand that Sophia has been an excellent public face for the company. She's articulate, charismatic, and very good at explaining complex technology to people who don't understand it. But there's a difference between being a spokesperson and being a founder. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. Because yes, we have a whiteboard in our fancy boardroom. Because sometimes you need to draw pictures for people who make millions of dollars but can't grasp basic concepts. Let me break this down in terms everyone can understand. I grabbed a marker and started writing numbers. Leora Tech generated $1.2 billion in revenue last year. Of that, approximately $900 million came directly from licenses and implementations of patents that I developed and filed. Another $200 million came from consulting services based on proprietary algorithms that I created. The remaining $100 million came from various partnerships and integrations. More numbers went on the board. In the same period, Leora Tech spent $557 million on operations. Of that, $340 million went to legitimate business expenses, salaries, equipment, office space, actual business development. The remaining $217 million went to what I generously call executive lifestyle management. I turned back to the board. Artisanal coffee bars in every office. A corporate jet that's used more for weekend getaways than business travel. Executive retreats to tropical locations where the most strenuous activity is poolside networking. A marketing budget that's somehow larger than our R&D budget, despite the fact that our technology sells itself. Marcus was scribbling notes furiously. Dr. Huang looked like she was doing math in her head and not liking the results. Now, I continued, let's talk about yesterday's events. At approximately 9:15 a.m., while I was attempting to surprise my wife with Valentine's gifts, I discovered that she had become engaged to Damien Locke, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, our primary competitor. This engagement was announced publicly, in our lobby, in front of our employees, and was recorded by multiple devices. The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. As majority owner, and as someone with a fiduciary duty to protect shareholder interests, I immediately implemented emergency financial protocols to prevent any potential conflicts of interest or misuse of company resources. These protocols will remain in place until we can ensure that Leora Tech's interests are being protected. I walked back to my seat but didn't sit down. Power move. Force everyone to look up at you. Which brings us to today's agenda item. I nodded toward Sophia. The resignation of our current CEO and the appointment of new leadership. Sophia stood up slowly, still clutching that manila envelope. When she spoke, her voice sounded like broken glass trying to form words. I, Sophia Monroe, hereby resign as Chief Executive Officer of Leora Tech, effective immediately. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I also want to make a public statement acknowledging that Adrian Kwan is the founder, majority owner, and true architect of Leora Tech's success. I have served as the public face of the company, but I was never its creator or visionary. She set the paper on the table like she was placing flowers on a grave. I take full responsibility for any confusion about the company's leadership structure, and I apologize to the board, our employees, and our investors for any damage my actions may have caused. The confession landed like a nuclear bomb in the middle of that pristine boardroom. Marcus Webb actually dropped his pen. Dr. Huang's mouth fell open. Janet was staring at the paper like it might spontaneously combust. Furthermore, Sophia continued, I acknowledge that certain personal expenses may have been inappropriately charged to company accounts, and I commit to working with our financial team to identify and repay any such charges. She sat down heavily. Like her legs had given out, I let the silence stretch for a full 30 seconds before speaking. Thank you, Sophia. I accept your resignation. I turned to the board. I'm assuming the role of CEO and Financial Oversight Director, effective immediately. Any expenditures over $10,000 will require my personal approval. Any contracts or partnerships will require board review. Any public statements about company direction or strategy will come through me. Dr. Huang raised her hand like she was in school. What about Damien Locke? What about Nexus Dynamics? Damien Locke is permanently banned from any involvement with Leora Tech business. Any existing partnerships or collaborations with Nexus Dynamics are terminated as of today. We'll honor existing contracts, but there will be no new agreements. Marcus finally found his voice. Adrian, this is a significant change in leadership structure. The investors will want to see a transition plan, stability metrics. The investors, I said, sitting down and folding my hands, will get exactly what they've always wanted. a company run by the person who actually built it. Leoratech just became a lot more stable, not less. I looked around the table at 12 very expensive people who were slowly realizing that their understanding of this company had been fundamentally wrong for 7 years. Any other questions? The silence told me everything I needed to know. Good. Let's get to work. You know what's funny about crisis management consultants? They're like interior decorators for disasters. They want everything to look pretty and coordinated, even when your life is burning down around you. Which is why, 3 hours after my boardroom coup, I was sitting in a cramped conference room with 2 overpaid PR specialists who kept using phrases like narrative control and reputation rehabilitation. "We need to soften this," said Miranda Cole, a 40-something blonde who probably charged more per hour than most people make in a month. She was wearing one of those power suits that screams, "I went to Wharton and I want you to know it." And she'd been talking nonstop for 20 minutes about messaging strategy. Soften what exactly? I asked, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. The whole situation, the divorce, the engagement, the leadership change. Right now it looks like a soap opera. We need to make it look like a carefully planned transition. Her partner, some guy named Brad who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's magazine and talked like he'd swallowed a marketing textbook, nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. We craft a narrative about natural evolution, mutual respect, amicable separation. Make Sophia look like a visionary who's stepping back to pursue new opportunities. I looked at these two and wondered if they'd been dropped on their heads as children. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You want me to lie? You want me to pretend that my wife didn't publicly humiliate me, didn't embezzle company funds, and didn't get engaged to our biggest competitor while I was standing in the lobby holding flowers?" Miranda leaned forward with the kind of earnest expression that probably worked on naive startup founders. "We want you to control the narrative before someone else does. Right now, you look like a vengeful ex-husband who's using his business position to punish his wife. That's not good for anyone." "I am a vengeful ex-husband using my business position to punish my wife," I said. "That's literally exactly what's happening here. Why would I pretend otherwise?" Brad jumped in with his consultant voice. "Because perception is reality in the business world, Adrian. It doesn't matter what actually happened. It matters what people think happened." I stared at him for a long moment, then stood up and walked to the window. We were in one of those generic conference rooms that corporate lawyers love: beige walls, fluorescent lighting, furniture that looks like it was designed by a committee of accountants. The kind of place where souls go to die. "You know what?" I said, turning back to face them. "You're fired." Miranda blinked. "Excuse me. You're fired. Both of you. Send me your bill, and don't let the door hit you on the way out." They gathered their laptops and their dignity and left without another word. Crisis management consultants might be expensive, but they know when they've been dismissed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a coffee shop on the Upper West Side that didn't care if I was worth $500 million or living paycheck to paycheck. Just black coffee, worn leather chairs, and the kind of anonymity you can only find in a city of 8 million people. Sophia walked in looking like she was going to her own execution. Gone was the power suit from the boardroom. Instead, she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like the woman I'd married 7 years ago, before the magazine covers and TED Talks and executive lifestyle management. She sat down across from me without ordering anything. "The PR people said you fired them," she said. "Yep. Why?" "Because they wanted me to lie about what happened. And I'm done lying." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and slid it across the table. "I wrote a statement. For the press release." I unfolded it and read. It was exactly the kind of corporate poetry that Miranda and Brad would have loved. Phrases like mutual decision to pursue separate paths and deep respect for our shared accomplishments, an exciting new chapter in both our personal and professional lives. Pure, grade A bullshit that I folded the paper back up and handed it to her. "No, Adrian, no. I'm not signing off on some fairy tale that makes you look like a visionary and me look like a supportive partner. That's not what happened." I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. "Here's what we're going to say." I started typing, reading aloud as I wrote. "Leoratech announces a change in leadership structure, effective immediately. Adrian Kwan, founder and majority owner of Leoratech, has assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer. Sophia Monroe has resigned from her position as CEO to pursue other opportunities. Sophia was shaking her head. That makes me sound like I was fired. You were fired. By your husband, for sleeping with the competition. But I'm being generous and calling it a resignation. Adrian, please. I held up a hand and kept typing. Mr. Kwon founded Leoratech 7 years ago and has been the primary architect of its technology platform and business strategy. Ms. Monroe served as the public face of the company during its growth phase. The transition reflects Leoratech's evolution into a more technically focused organization under its founder's direct leadership. I looked up at her. That's it. Simple, factual, and true. It doesn't explain anything. People are going to ask questions. Let them ask. The truth isn't complicated, Sophia. You got caught embezzling and cheating, and now you're facing consequences. Everything else is just noise. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. What about the engagement? What about Damien? What about him? People saw the video. It's all over social media. They're going to want to know how that fits into the timeline. I shrugged. That's between you and Damien. Leoratech's statement is about Leoratech business. Your personal life is your personal problem. But if you don't address it, people are going to assume what actually happened. That my wife got engaged to another man while she was still married to me, and that I responded by taking control of the company I built, which is exactly what happened. I finished typing and showed her the screen. This goes out at 5 p.m. today. You can issue your own statement if you want to explain yourself, but this is Leoratech's official position. She read it again, her face getting paler with each word. This is going to destroy my reputation. Your reputation destroyed itself yesterday morning. I'm just declining to help rebuild it. Adrian, I know you're angry. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and realized it was true. I was angry last night. This morning I was furious. But right now I'm just tired. Tired of pretending, tired of letting you take credit for my work, tired of being the technical guy while you play CEO. I stood up and left a 20 on the table for coffee I hadn't finished. The statement goes out at 5. If you want to add anything, you've got until 4:30. What if I refuse to sign it? Then it goes out without your signature. And tomorrow I start talking to journalists about the $473,000 in fraudulent expenses. Your choice. I walked out of that coffee shop and into the afternoon Manhattan chaos, leaving my soon-to-be ex-wife sitting alone with a statement that told the truth for the first time in years. It's exactly 5 p.m. The press release went live. By 5:30, my phone was ringing off the hook with interview requests. By 6 p.m., TechCrunch had posted an article calling me the hidden genius behind Leoratech's success. By 8 p.m., Forbes wanted to do a cover story. Sophia's phone, I imagined, had gone very quiet very quickly. Funny how the truth works that way. You know what nobody tells you about becoming suddenly famous in the tech world? Everyone wants a piece of you, and 90% of them are complete vultures. 2 weeks after my press release turned Leoratech's leadership structure upside down, I was sitting in meetings with venture capitalists who pronounced my name wrong, startup founders who wanted me to validate their half-baked ideas, and reporters who kept asking if I was okay after my very public divorce. But then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, I got an email that actually made me sit up and pay attention. Mr. Kwon. It began, "My name is Layla Park, and 6 months ago your ex-wife told me my idea was interesting but not commercially viable. I think she was wrong. Would you be willing to give me 30 minutes to prove it?" Attached was a pitch deck for something called Neuron Layer, an AI platform that could analyze emotional nuance in real-time communication. Not the usual AI will solve everything bullshit that every startup was peddling, but actual technical innovation with real-world applications that I'd never heard of. Layla Park, which was intriguing. In the tech world, especially in New York, everyone knows everyone, or at least pretends to. But this woman had somehow stayed under my radar while building something that looked genuinely revolutionary. I emailed back. Thursday, 2 p.m. My office. But then I changed my mind. Leoratech's offices were still too connected to Sophia, too full of champagne fountains and artisanal coffee bars, and the lingering scent of executive lifestyle management. If I was going to look at something real, something new, I wanted to do it somewhere that felt authentic, which is how I found myself standing in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, breathing air that smelled like coffee beans and machine oil, and the particular energy that comes from people actually building things instead of just talking about building things. Layla Park turned out to be 27 years old, 5'0", with the kind of focused intensity that made you pay attention even when she was just shaking your hand. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that had actual coffee stains on it, not the kind of carefully curated casual that tech executives wear to prove they're one of the people, but the real thing. The uniform of someone who'd been coding for 18 hours straight and forgotten that food exists. "Mr. Kwan," she said, leading me through a space that was part office, part laboratory, part controlled chaos. "Thank you for coming out here. I know it's not exactly Manhattan corporate." "That's exactly why I wanted to come here," I said, looking around at workstations that were obviously built for function over form, whiteboards covered in actual equations instead of marketing slogans, and a coffee setup that involved a single, ancient machine instead of a barista who charged more per latte than most people make in an hour. The team was small. Maybe 15 people, all young, all looking like they'd rather be coding than eating or sleeping or dealing with whatever existential crisis was currently trending on social media. The kind of people who built things because they couldn't help themselves, not because they wanted to get rich and famous. "Show me what you've got," I said. Layla walked me over to a workstation where 3 monitors displayed what looked like a conversation analysis in real time. Traditional AI can parse language for keywords, sentiment, basic emotional indicators, she explained, her hands moving as she talked. But it misses the nuance. The difference between genuine enthusiasm and polite agreement. The gap between what someone says and what they actually mean. She pulled up a demo, a customer service chat where the AI was analyzing not just the words being typed, but the rhythm of the typing, the pause patterns, the subtle linguistic choices that revealed frustration, confusion, genuine satisfaction. "This is a live customer service interaction," she said. "Watch the emotional mapping." On the screen, colors shifted and flowed as the conversation progressed. Green for genuine satisfaction, yellow for mild confusion, red for building frustration. But more than that, the AI was tracking micro-patterns, identifying the exact moment when a customer went from slightly annoyed to ready to cancel their subscription. "Jesus," I said, because sometimes technical elegance just hits you in the gut. You're reading between the lines in real time. Exactly. And not just in customer service. Imagine this in therapy sessions, helping therapists identify when a patient is minimizing their problems. In negotiations, helping lawyers understand when the other side is bluffing. In education, helping teachers know when a student is genuinely confused versus just not paying attention. I watched the demo run through scenario after scenario, and each one made more sense than the last. This wasn't some pie-in-the-sky AI fantasy. This was practical, immediate, useful technology that could be implemented tomorrow. "What did Sophia say when you pitched this?" I asked. Layla's expression darkened. She said emotional intelligence couldn't be quantified, that the technology was interesting but not commercially viable, and that Leoratech was focused on more scalable solutions. Then she spent 20 minutes telling me about some champagne fountain they were installing in the executive conference room. I laughed, not the bitter laugh I'd been doing a lot of lately, but actual amusement. Yeah, that sounds like Sophia. She never understood that the best technology solves real problems instead of creating pretty presentations. "The thing is," Layla continued, "I know this works. We've been running pilots with 3 companies for 6 months. Customer satisfaction is up 30%, employee retention is up 20%, and one of our pilot companies increased their sales conversion rate by 45% just by understanding emotional context in their client interactions." She pulled out a tablet and showed me the metrics. Real numbers, real results, real impact. The kind of data that made investors write checks and competitors start panicking. "What do you need?" I asked. "Funding to scale the platform, partnerships with companies that actually want to solve problems, and a board seat for someone who understands that technology should make people's lives better, not just make PowerPoint presentations look impressive." I looked around the warehouse again, at the team of brilliant kids who were building something that could change how humans communicate, at the workstations that prioritized function over form, at the energy of people who believe they could actually make the world better through code. 25 million for 40% and a board seat, I said, Layla blinked. What? $25 million for 40% equity and a board seat. Standard terms. I'll have my lawyers draft the paperwork by Friday. The warehouse went quiet. Not the nervous quiet of people afraid they're about to get fired, but the stunned quiet of people who've just realized their dreams are about to become reality. Mr. Kwan, Layla said, are you serious? Dead serious. But I have conditions. Her face got cautious. What kind of conditions? No champagne fountains. No artisanal coffee bars. No executive retreats to tropical locations. No marble lobbies or ice sculptures or any of the bullshit that turns a tech company into a lifestyle brand. You keep doing what you're doing, building things that matter. The team erupted in cheers. Someone might have actually cried. Diego Ramos, one of the senior engineers who'd somehow escaped the Leoratech corporate culture wars, was grinning like he'd won the lottery. Also, I added, you're hiring Elena Vargas as your operations manager. She's been working for people who don't appreciate intelligence and dedication. I think she'd fit in better here. As I walked back to my car, leaving behind a warehouse full of brilliant people who were about to change the world, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something real instead of just managing something pretty. Sophia could keep her champagne fountains. I had something better. I had the future. Here's something nobody tells you about being worth $500 million. Eventually, you realize that marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows and views that make real estate agents weep don't actually make you happy. They just make you expensive. Which is why, 6 weeks after nuking my marriage and taking back my company, I was standing in the empty penthouse that used to be my home, watching movers wrap my life in bubble wrap and cardboard. The penthouse had been Sophia's idea, of course. We need a space that reflects our success, she'd said, which translated to, I want a place that makes other people jealous when they see it on Instagram. 34 floors above Manhattan, 3,000 square feet of aggressively modern design, and enough marble to outfit a small mausoleum. The kind of place where you're afraid to put your feet up because everything costs more than most people's cars. But as I watched the movers tape up boxes and dismantle furniture that I'd never actually liked, I felt lighter. Like I was shedding skin that had never quite fit right. Sir, one of the movers, a guy named Carlos who'd been doing this job for 20 years and had the arms to prove it, gestured toward the kitchen. What about the espresso machine? I looked at the chrome monstrosity that took up half the counter space and required a PhD in mechanical engineering to operate. Sophia had bought it because some lifestyle blogger said it was essential for the modern executive. I'd used it maybe twice, and both times I'd ended up just going to the deli downstairs for actual coffee. Leave it, I said. The new owners can figure out what to do with it. 3 hours later, I was standing in what was about to become my new home, a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side that cost about 1/10 of what the penthouse had been worth. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, windows that actually opened, and a kitchen where you could make coffee without a computer science degree. The building was one of those pre-war places that had actual character instead of designer character. My neighbors weren't investment bankers or corporate lawyers or people who introduced themselves by mentioning their net worth. They were teachers and artists and grad students and people who held the elevator for strangers and said, thank you, when you did the same. Mrs. Chen from 4B brought me homemade dumplings on my first day. Welcome to the building, she said, like it was perfectly normal to feed your neighbors instead of pretending they didn't exist. When I told her I was between jobs, technically true, she didn't ask what I did before or how much money I made. She just said the dumplings were better reheated in a pan, not the microwave. That first night, sitting on my couch, an actual comfortable couch, not some designer torture device that looked good in magazines, eating Mrs. Chen's dumplings and listening to the sounds of people living actual lives instead of performing success, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, which is probably why, when Columbia University called 3 days later, I didn't hang up immediately. Mr. Kwan, said Dr. Margaret Torres, chair of the computer science department, we'd like to offer you a visiting professorship. 1 class per semester, graduate level, focus on practical applications of emerging technologies. Teaching. When was the last time I'd thought about teaching? Probably never, if I'm being honest. My career had been about building things, selling things, scaling things. The idea of standing in front of a classroom, and actually explaining concepts instead of just implementing them felt completely foreign. What would I be teaching? I asked. Whatever you want. Your expertise in AI implementation, your experience with large-scale system architecture, your insights into turning research into viable products. The students need to hear from someone who's actually built things instead of just studying them. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. I'll do it. 2 weeks later, I was standing in front of 23 graduate students who looked like they'd been living on coffee and determination for the past 6 months. Which, let's be honest, they probably had. Graduate school in computer science is basically an endurance test disguised as education. Good morning, I said, looking out at faces that ranged from cautiously optimistic to completely exhausted. I'm Adrian Kwan, and before we start, let me tell you what this class isn't going to be about. I wrote on the whiteboard. Yes, an actual whiteboard, not some fancy digital display. Theory without application. Code without purpose. Innovation without impact. This class is about building things that matter. Not building things that look impressive on your resume or make investors write checks, but building things that actually solve real problems for real people. A hand shot up. Student in the back row, wearing a hoodie that had definitely seen better days. Professor Kwan, what's the difference between innovation and impact? Good question. I pointed to her. What's your name? Arya Nguyen. Arya, how many of you have spent the last semester working on projects that you know will never be used by anyone except your professors? About half the hands in the room went up. Honest kids, that's innovation without impact. You're solving theoretical problems with elegant solutions that will live and die in academic papers. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not what this class is about. I walked over to the window, looked out at the campus where students were hurrying between classes, probably stressing about deadlines and job interviews, and whether they'd ever actually use anything they were learning. Impact is when a 30-year-old single mother in Detroit uses your software to manage her small business more efficiently, so she can spend more time with her kids. Impact is when a therapist in rural Montana can better understand their patients because your AI helps them recognize emotional patterns they might have missed. Impact is when technology makes someone's life genuinely better, not just more convenient. Another hand. This one from a tall kid in the front row who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Tund Okafor, he said, introducing himself with a slight Nigerian accent. How do you balance impact with profitability? I mean, helping people is great, but companies need to make money to survive. Smart question. The kind that showed he was thinking beyond the classroom. Tund, here's something the business world doesn't want you to know. The most profitable companies are usually the ones that solve real problems really well. Everything else is just marketing. I spent the next hour talking about neuron layer, about identifying genuine needs versus manufactured ones, about the difference between building technology that improves people's lives and building technology that just makes their problems more expensive. After class, Arya and Tund stayed behind. Professor Kwan, Arya said, that single mother in Detroit you mentioned, is that a real example? Not yet, I said, but it could be. That's what we're going to work on this semester. Tund was taking notes in a worn notebook that looked like it had survived several academic wars. You really think we can build something that matters? I don't think you can, I said. I know you can. The question is whether you want to. Walking home that evening, past the Korean restaurant where the owner remembered how I liked my bulgogi, past the bookstore where they knew I was working my way through their entire philosophy section, past the park where kids played pickup basketball and nobody cared what anyone did for a living, I realized something. This was what success actually looked like. Not marble countertops or champagne fountains or magazine covers. Just people doing meaningful work, treating each other with basic human decency, and building things that made the world a little bit better. My phone buzzed. Text message from Elena, who was settling in beautifully at Neuron Layer. The Microsoft deal went through. Layla says to tell you the team wants to take you out to celebrate. Somewhere with actual food, not a networking event. I smiled and typed back. I know just the place. Living quietly, it turns out, is a skill. For the first time in maybe a decade, I wasn't checking my phone every 30 seconds or scheduling meetings that could have been emails or pretending to care about quarterly projections that were really just elaborate guessing games. Instead, I was grading papers from students who actually wanted to learn something. drinking coffee that came from a machine I could operate without an engineering degree, and discovering that Manhattan has actual neighborhoods where people know each other's names. 6 months after the Great Leoritech implosion, my life had settled into something that felt suspiciously like contentment. Teach Tuesday and Thursday mornings, spend afternoons working with Layla's team on projects that might actually change the world, evenings reading books that had nothing to do with business strategy or market disruption or any of the other buzzwords that pass for wisdom in corporate America. I was sitting in my favorite chair, an actual comfortable chair that I'd bought because it was comfortable, not because it would look good in photos, reading a biography of Richard Feynman and thinking about how to explain quantum computing to graduate students when the doorbell rang. The mail carrier, a woman named Rosa who'd been delivering to this building for 15 years and knew everyone's coffee preferences, handed me a stack of bills and catalogs and one envelope that made me stop in the hallway. Cream-colored paper, expensive weight, handwritten address in careful script. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. 7 years of marriage teaches you things like that. Sophia. I stood there for a long moment, holding that letter like it might explode. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, let whatever she had to say disappear into the New York City waste management system along with all the other garbage. But curiosity won out, like it usually does. Back in my apartment, I opened the envelope carefully, because apparently I'm the kind of person who still respects good stationery, even when it comes from people who've betrayed me. The letter was 3 pages long, written in the same careful script on matching paper. Real paper, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. Even in exile, Sophia maintained her standards. Adrian, I don't expect you to read this, but I needed to write it. Therapy. Yes, I'm in therapy now. Dr. Miranda Castellanos in Portland, if you're wondering, says that sometimes we need to say things out loud, even if the other person never hears them. But I'm hoping you'll hear this that I'm in Portland now. Teaching coding to kids who can't afford computers, working with a nonprofit that refurbishes old laptops and gets them to families who need them. It's not glamorous work. There are no magazine covers or TED Talks or networking events with artisanal cheese boards. Just kids who want to learn and computers that crash more often than they work, and the kind of satisfaction that doesn't photograph well for Instagram, that I had to stop reading and pour myself a cup of coffee. Portland. Teaching kids. The woman who used to complain about flying commercial was now apparently working with nonprofit organizations and refurbished computers. The funny thing is, I'm good at it. Not good at teaching. I'm still learning that part, but good at connecting with these kids. They don't care that I used to be on magazine covers or that I know how to work a room full of investors. They care that I can show them how to write code that does something useful, how to solve problems that matter to them. Last week, a 15-year-old named Marcus built an app that helps his grandmother track her medications. Nothing fancy, just a simple reminder system with a user interface designed for someone with arthritis. It's not going to change the world or make anyone rich, but it's going to help one person live a little easier. And watching Marcus demo it to the class, seeing how proud he was of building something that mattered, I understood something I should have figured out years ago. You tried to teach me this, didn't you? The difference between being important and being authentic. Between building things that look impressive and building things that actually work. Between performing success and actually achieving it. I set the letter down and walked to the window. Outside, Mrs. Chun was tending to the small garden she'd somehow convinced the building management to let her plant in the courtyard. Nothing fancy, just tomatoes and herbs and flowers that made the space feel alive instead of just functional. I know this doesn't excuse what I did. I know saying sorry doesn't undo the humiliation or the betrayal or the fact that I spent 3 years treating your company like my personal piggy bank. I know that getting engaged to Damien while you were standing in the lobby with flowers is probably the most selfish, cruel thing I've ever done to another human being. But I want you to know that it wasn't calculated. It wasn't some master plan to hurt you or steal your company or manipulate the situation to my advantage. It was just stupidity. The kind of stupidity that comes from believing your own press releases, from thinking that the character you play in public is the same as the person you actually are. Damien and I lasted exactly 6 weeks after you froze the accounts. Turns out that a relationship built on mutual ambition and strategic networking doesn't hold up well when one person becomes a cautionary tale and the other person realizes they're dating someone with no actual skills. He's moved on to someone who can actually help his career. I've moved on to kids who think coding is magic. I laugh despite myself. 6 weeks. Their great romance, their strategic partnership, their whatever the hell it was had lasted 6 weeks once the money and the glamour and the mutual benefit disappeared. That I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect us to be friends or to have coffee and catch up on old times. I don't even expect you to finish reading this letter. But I wanted you to know that your example, your actual example, not the version of you I created in my head to justify my behavior, has been haunting me for 6 months. Every time one of these kids shows me something they've built, every time I see genuine excitement about solving a real problem instead of impressing an audience, I think about you standing in that boardroom, calmly explaining the difference between creating value and performing success. I think about all the times you tried to show me that same difference, and how I was too busy playing CEO to notice that. I hope you're building things that matter. I hope you're working with people who appreciate your brain instead of just your bank account. I hope you found the kind of satisfaction that doesn't need an audience to validate it. That I hope you're happy. Sophia P.S. Elena sent me pictures of the Neuron Layer launch event. It looks like everything Leoratech should have been. People who care about the work more than the party. I'm glad you found them. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Outside, the afternoon light was starting to fade, and I could hear the sounds of people coming home from work, kids playing in the courtyard, the gentle chaos of a neighborhood where people actually lived instead of just existing. The truth was, I didn't know how I felt about Sophia's letter. Angry? Relieved? Sad? Maybe all of those things, or maybe none of them. Maybe the most honest response was just acknowledgement. She'd said what she needed to say, and I'd heard it. And that was enough. I filed the letter in my desk drawer, next to the incorporation papers for Leoratech and the patent documents and all the other artifacts of a life I used to live. Not because I was keeping it as evidence or planning to frame it or anything dramatic like that. Just because some things deserve to be preserved, even when you're not sure. WHY.my phone buzzed. Text from Tund, my star student who was working on an AI system to help small farmers optimize crop rotation. Professor Kwan, the Ghana pilot program results are in. 23% increase in crop yield. The farmers want to expand the system to 3 more villages. I smiled and typed back. Excellent work. Let's talk about scaling on Thursday. Real problems, real solutions, real impact. Just like we talked about in class. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well. You know what winning actually looks like. It's not applause or magazine covers or ice sculptures shaped like your company logo. It's standing in your office, your real office, not some marble temple to corporate excess. Watching people solve problems that mattered. I was back at Leoratech, but it looked nothing like the place Sophia had turned into her personal stage. Gone were the champagne fountains and artisanal coffee bars and networking lounges that served no purpose except burning money. Instead, the space hummed with the sound of actual work. Keyboards clicking, code compiling, engineers collaborating on solutions instead of posing for LinkedIn photos. Janet Cross walked by, no longer clicking her pen like a nervous metronome. She'd thrived under actual financial guardrails, turned out. Amazing what happens when someone gives you clear rules instead of vague suggestions about brand building and executive presence. My phone buzzed. Layla, texting from Neuron Layer's new offices. Microsoft deal is official. 3-year contract, $127 million. Also, Elena says hi and wants to know if you're free for dinner Thursday. Somewhere that serves actual food, not networking opportunities. I smiled and typed back. Tell Elena yes, and congratulations on changing the world. That afternoon, I walked through Columbia's campus to my advanced AI ethics class. Aria Nguyen had just defended her thesis on algorithmic bias in healthcare, work that MIT was already trying to recruit her for. Tund Okafor's crop optimization system was expanding to 12 African countries, helping farmers increase yields while reducing environmental impact. Real work. Real impact. Real people solving real problems. That evening, I stood at my apartment window, watching Central Park settle into darkness 34 floors below. No, wait, I wasn't 34 floors up anymore. I was on the 8th floor of a building where people knew each other's names, where Mrs. Chen still brought me dumplings, where success was measured in satisfied customers and students who changed the world instead of press coverage and quarterly projections. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Kwan, this is Sarah Martinez from TechCrunch. We're doing a follow-up piece on the Leora Tech transition. How would you define success now compared to a year ago? I looked around my comfortable apartment, thought about my students defending dissertations that would help millions of people, considered the quiet satisfaction of building things that mattered instead of things that impressed. Success, I said, is when you don't need an audience to validate your accomplishments. When the work speaks for itself, and the impact matters more than the applause. That's unexpectedly philosophical for a tech CEO. Maybe that's the problem with how we define leadership in this industry. After I hung up, I poured myself a small glass of that 25-year-old Glendronach and sat in my comfortable chair with a book about quantum mechanics. Outside, the city continued its eternal dance of ambition and dreams and people trying to make something of themselves. But for the first time in years, I wasn't part of that frantic energy. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with people who valued substance over style. My phone buzzed one more time. Elena, sending a photo from Neuron Layer's celebration dinner. 20-something brilliant engineers raising glasses of beer, grinning like they'd just discovered fire. The caption read, "Thank you for showing us what real success looks like." I smiled and turned off my phone. Some victories don't need documentation. They just need to be real. Outside, Manhattan glittered with a million stories of people chasing their definitions of winning. But up here, in a quiet apartment where the coffee came from a simple machine and the furniture was chosen for comfort instead of status, I'd found something better than winning. I'd found peace. And in a city that never sleeps, in an industry that never stops performing, in a world that confuses noise with progress, peace was the rarest victory of all. The war was over. The battlefield was quiet. And for the first time in years, Adrian Kwan was exactly where he belonged.